Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 978. Hey, if you want to download this workbook, Excel Magic Trick 978, click on the link below the video. Hey, this is going to be an epic video about the SUMIFS and SUMIF function. Now, there over on this topic sheet here, there's 36 topics. Now, this is going to be a long video, so if you look below the video and click on the Show More button, this table of contents exists below the video with time links. So you can pick any topic you want here and jump to that section of the video. Let's go back over to 978 sheet. Now, SUMIFS is a function that allows you to add with one or more criteria or condition. SUMIF just has one condition. Now, SUMIF has been around for a long time, but SUMIFS came in 2007. So if you have Excel 2007, 10, or 13, the SUMIFS functions exist. Now, everything we learn in this video is applicable to COUNTIFs, COUNTIF, AVERAGEIFs, and so on. A lot of what we're going to talk about in this video is about criteria and conditions. And everything that we learn here is applicable whether you're using SUMIFS, SUMIF, COUNTIFs, COUNTIF, etc. Now, we're going to start off, almost everything we're going to talk about is adding with two or more criteria. So we're going to use SUMIFS. The S means that there is more than one criteria. And when you use SUMIFS, it's an AND criteria, which means all the criteria or conditions must be met for the number to be added. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. Now, there are other alternatives to the SUMIFS. You could be using the DSUM or sum product, but if you have 2007 or later, use SUMIFS because it's a lot faster calculating. SUMIFS, as compared to DSUM, SUMIFs allow you to copy a formula down a column, whereas DSUM and the other D functions have a restriction when it comes to copying a formula because of the criteria argument. We're not going to talk about that here, but I'm just listing an advantage of SUMIFs. Finally, SUMIFs can do a lot of the same thing that pivot tables can, but SUMIFs, the advantage to formulas over pivot tables is that they instantly update when data is changed. Now, we have 36 examples, and I'm going to use, for 2/3 of the example, I'm going to use this huge data set. So if I click here and use Control down arrow, you can see I have almost 2,000 records here. Control Home jumps back to A1. So I don't want to have to create these formulas and keep highlighting the columns. So I'm going to use define names. Now I have a little blurb up here for define names. Define names just allows us to name a column instead of using the cell references directly in our formula. We'll use the name. And there's a great way to name a table. I want this column to be named date, this column to be region, this one to be sales rep. I'm going to highlight the field names. And the way this trick is going to work is the name we want is at the top of each column. Now I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Control Shift down arrow. That highlights the whole table. Now I'm going to use the scroll bar just to jump back up here. And I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, which is right here, Control Shift F3. That creates names from selection. Now I do not want the left column. I just want the top row. So this column would be name, date, this one region, etc. Click OK. Now let's test it. If I come up to the name box and go to the drop down, if I say product, boom, that product column is highlighted. Date, and that date column is highlighted. Now I'm going to scroll all the way down and make sure I got it. It looks like it's correct. Cost of goods sold. All right, let's get busy here. Now, SUMIFS with an S can be used for adding with one or more conditions or criteria. And I actually like to use it a lot of time, even when I have one condition, because here is the function that's been around for a long time, SUMIF. Notice there's an if and an S version. The if means one criterion only. Ifs can do one or more criteria. Now I'm going to hit Tab. The reason that I like to use the S version for all of my examples, whether they're 1, 2, 3, 4, or more criteria, is because the screen tips are a little bit ambiguous here. It says range, criteria, and sum range. Sometimes people get confused, and they highlight the numbers they want to add for the range function. So generally, if I'm doing one criteria. I clicked escape there. I use SUMIFS. And let's just compare and contrast. S. Now, notice once the drop down is highlighted, I can hit the tab key. Sum range, criteria range, criteria. So they've named the arguments in the screen tip with names that are more easily understood. There's no ambiguity here at all. This is the sum range, and if I type a comma, that's the criteria range. So that's why I like to use this SUMIFS for all my situations when I'm adding with criteria. All right, so sum range. I'm pretty much for all these examples going to add the sales. So I'm going to use my define name. I'm going to type in S, and notice that the dog tag symbol means this is a defined name. So these f of x mean it's a function. So once I have it selected, I'm going to hit tab. That's what I'm trying to sum. I don't want to sum all of them, so I'm going to type a comma and then highlight the criteria range, which is customer. So I'm going to type CU, oh, it's down at the bottom. How about S? So CUS, and then I get my dog tag tab. So customer, that's the criteria range. And then finally, the criteria. What this means is it's not going to add all of them. It's literally going to go through this entire customer column and ask the question, are you Amazon, true or false? This one's true, so it'll use that sales number. Is HD equal to Amazon the criteria? False, so this number is not adding. It goes all the way down, and only when it finds an Amazon does it take the associated sales number. All right. There's our first example of SUMIFS, adding with one criteria. Now, I'd actually like to show you how to add data validation here. I should have cleared that. Now, I want to scroll over to the side. And the beauty of data validation is, notice I have a bunch of customers. I'd like a drop down where I could just select, and instantly the number will update because this is our criteria or condition. I'm going to scroll over here, and I have a list. And pretty much the fields we're going to use for the whole video are region, sales rep, and customer. So here's this list. So what I'd like to do is create a drop-down list that will limit what could go into the criteria cell to this list. I've also put a question mark and an asterisk. Those are wild cards. That is a wild card that I can use as criteria that says give me all of the records in this field. And we'll talk more about that later. All right, let's come over here, and we're going to go to in 2007, 10, and 13, you go to Home, Conditional Formatting. I'm sorry, not Conditional Formatting. Data Validation, and you click this button. The keyboard that works in all versions is Alt-DL. So Alt-DL. The default is any value. I don't want to allow any value. I want a list. And then here's the source. I'm going to scroll over and select that list. And then here, let's check this out. Again, that question mark asterisk is great because if you select that as criteria, it'll just add all of them. Click OK. Notice, ignore blanks and in-cell drop-down. So that's how we get that in-cell drop-down. So now I can change this to The Economist, and there instantly it updates McClendon's. Or I could select this one, which is all of them. Now, for a single cell form, they'll probably wouldn't do that, right? Because we just use some. But later, when we have multiple conditions, that'll be a great trick. So Amazon. All right, now two criteria. I'm going to scroll down here a bit. The key here is it's Amazon and for customer and sales rep Gigi. Both of these have to be true. Now, this is a big data set, but if you scroll down, here's the first record where it's both Gigi and Amazon, meaning the criteria match true. The second criteria match true, so that means we get to use that number. So that's called AND criteria. They both have to be true to add. All right, ready? So equals SUMIFS. Sum range, I'm going to type S and then tab and then comma. I'm actually going to copy this because I'm going to use this over and over with all sorts of different criteria situations. All right, criteria range, we have customer, so I'm going to type CUS tab, comma, and then sales rep. I think I can do S down arrow. Notice it went down and then tab. Now, actually, I made a mistake there. What am I doing? I'm asleep at the wheel. Let's backspace here. I forgot to read the screen tips. Now, luckily, this screen tip thing was up there to alert me because I was already into criteria 1 and I was typing out a range. That's not correct. If I put my cursor right here, criteria range, that's always going to be the full range because it has the word range. This says criteria, so it just wants the single criteria. So I'm going to click there. And then comma, I'm reading carefully now. Now it says, and you can move your screen tip with that cursor right there. It says criteria range 2. This is where I want S down arrow tab. I'm reading the screen tip, comma, to get to the next one, and criteria. I click on GG. And there we have it. So adding with 2 criteria. Now, let's come down here to 3 criteria. So I'm going to F2 to put it in edit mode, and then Control V. There's the start of most of my formulas. Now, I have 1, 2, 3. I'm going to start with region. So I'm going to type REG tab, comma, and then southeast. There's the criteria 1, comma, and I'm going to type CUS tab. There's the criteria range, comma, and then the customer, comma. I need the sales rep, so S down arrow tab. I'm reading my screen tips. It says criteria range 3, comma, and then criteria 3. Notice you just keep on going, and your screen tip actually will expand more and more criteria range with a number, criteria with a number. All right, I'm going to close parentheses. Now, there we go. With 3 criteria, it's gone through this whole list, and it added only the numbers where region was southeast, customer Amazon, and sales rep GG. Now, check this out. What if I really wanted to see GG in the southeast? I could come up here and select this little asterisk, and now it's got all of them. It, in essence, has no criteria for customer. I'll click Amazon there. Now, let's talk about comparative operators, because all of the examples for criteria have been an actual thing in a cell, right? Now, one other thing about SUMIFS and SUMIF function and COUNTIF and COUNTIFS and all those, if you go to help, it will show you examples like this, where you're actually typing the criteria into the cells. In general, that's inefficient, because the reason Excel was made is so that you could put stuff into cells, refer to the stuff with cell references in your formula, and then change it as we did over here. So that would be an inefficient way to do it. All right, now let's talk about comparative operators. Greater than 5,000, greater than or equal to the 5,000, less than 5,000, less than or equal to 5,000, exactly 5,000, and not. So these are the different types of comparative operators we can have. The only ones that may be strange are greater than or equal to and less than or equal to. In math, we have a single symbol, but not in Excel. We have to type 2 symbols, and the equal sign always comes last. If it's exactly equal to something, you don't got to use the equal sign. You just type the thing. And the not is less than and then greater than. Now, let's add sales with these 2 conditions. Now, I'm going to do, oops, F2 Control V. And the first, I'll put this up here, the first criteria range, I'm going to take the sales range a second time. So I'm going to type S tab, because now I have a criteria for this sum range, comma, and then the criteria 1 is going to be that a relative cell reference. By the way, defined names are by default absolute. So when I copy this down, it'll be locked on that range over there. But that's a relative cell reference. So as I copy down, the criteria will properly move to the next cell below, comma. Criteria 2, I have region, so I'm going to type REG tab, comma, to get to my criteria. Ooh, I typed a period. Notice the screen tip is polite. It didn't bold the next argument. So I'm going to backspace and type a comma. And then there is our relative cell reference for the region west. Close parentheses. Control Enter, double click, and send it down. Now, if I come over here, you can see that those remained locked as we copied down, but those relative cell references moved. If you scroll up, you can see that blue and that purple right there are still locked in place. By default, defined names are locked. Now, why is this 0? Sometimes when you get a 0 result, it's like, uh-oh, it didn't work. No, it worked fine. It's because there's no sales exactly equal to 5,000 in the West. If I were to come over here and change this one right here to exactly 5,000. See, it's got the West there, and now I made it exactly 5,000. It would add, right? And then I found another West. Or I just changed this to West and this to 5,000. Of course, now it would give me the number 10,000. Now I'm going to undo that with Control Z, Z, Z. I did 3 Z's for Control Z. Now here, this example is great. We had 2 conditions, and we saw how to use our comparative operators. We'll talk more about comparative operators in just a moment. But let's look at a situation where it's actually probably more helpful to use the SUMIF. Now again, why do we use the SUMIFs, or why do I tend to use the SUMIF, or why do I teach the SUMIFs for all the situation? It's because there's no ambiguity. That says sales range, and that says criteria range. But here's a great use for SUMIF. It can only do one criteria, so if you have more than one, you're out of luck. But if the range you're going to add is the same as the criteria range, which we have criteria for numbers, and we want to add these numbers, then check this out. You can simply put the criteria range in, S tab for sales, and the criteria. If that range right there, that range argument, is the same, or if you leave the sum range argument out, it will assume that these are numbers and that you're both going to run a criteria on them and add them. So that's a much shorter formula. I don't have to type that second range. So Control Enter and double click and send it down. So there we go, and it come to the end, and it added all the sales not equal to 5,000, which should be just about all of them. So there are 3 sales. Obviously, they're not in the West, right? But there's 3 sales that are equal to 5,000. Now we'd like to talk a little bit more about comparative operators. Now here's an example we want to add with 2 criteria, Amazon and greater than 5,000. So 2 different columns with 2 different criteria. And then we want to do the same thing down here, but we want to see an advantage to not putting the comparative operator down here. Now this is convenient, right? We can do our formula here. Whoops, I've lost my copy, so I'm going to equal SUMIFS, and then S tab, comma. I'm going to have to copy that again. Copy. All right, so now I want to look at the customer column for criteria range 1. So CUS tab, comma, criteria 1. I'm going to go Amazon, and then comma the sales, S tab, comma, and then criteria 2. Now, actually, does it matter in which order we set up these criteria? Absolutely not, because it's an AND criteria. It doesn't matter which order. It's only when it gets true, true for both criteria, or if you have more criteria, more truths, that it will then add. All right, so this is convenient. We've done this. And it's nice because you can, what if I just wanted to say Amazon less than or equal to 5,000? Absolutely beautiful. So comparative operator and number right in the cell. What about down here? Well, down here I want to use this 5,000 not only in a formula that says greater than or equal to 5,000, but also a different formula that says exactly 5,000. So I need to use this formula input in multiple ways. If I were to, in this cell, put a comparative operator like here, well, what would it do? First off, you notice that it's a line left. That means it's text, right? As soon as you put that comparative operator, it's no longer considered a number. So if I put a comparative operator here, I'm not allowed to use this formula input down in this different formula. So here, we want to see how to add the comparative operator inside the formula and join it with a number in the cell. Why? Because we want to use that number in 2 or more different formulas. F2, Control V. All right, and our first criteria range is going to be the customer. Actually, I can just steal this from up here. Watch this. Now, those are relative cell references, and the defined names are absolute, right? I'm just going to copy the cell and then Control V. Now, that doesn't work, but notice all the cell references are in exactly the same place. Why? Because that cell reference right there was 1, 2 up and 1 to the left. Same relative position as up here. All right, so now it's not working because it can't find any sales to customer Amazon that are exactly 5,000. But I want to amend this. So this one right here, I want to add the comparative operator. Now I have to put the comparative operator in double quotes. I'm going to say greater than or equal to. That's in double quotes. Now notice the cell reference went black. That means there's something wrong with our formula. Well, it wouldn't calculate if I hit enter. But I need to join this comparative operator to that cell reference. So I use ampersand, the join symbol, Shift 7. And there we have it. Now if I highlight this and use my F9 key to evaluate, I can see that by joining them, I'm going to hit F9. It gives me the criteria, greater than or equal to 5,000. I'm going to Control Z. That F9 key is great to see certain parts of the formula, how they evaluate, but immediately Control Z to undo it. All right, so now let's see if this works. And sure enough, it works perfectly. Now I can come over here and I can use that number. Control, I've somehow lost it again. Okay, well, let's see, Control V. Okay, so I got it. Now, I just want to say exactly 5,000. So now I'm going to click on that, and it should give me, oh, I'm trying to do the SUMIF. I need to list the, I'm going to take away this. Now, notice what did I do there? So the difference between SUMIFS and SUMIF, sum range, criteria range, notice that trick doesn't work with SUMIFs because you have to repeat. So I didn't show you earlier, but I'd actually have to repeat the sales number twice if I were going to use SUMIF. If the sum range here is numbers and the criteria range is numbers. So that'll give me the right answer, right? But in some ways, it's easier just to, when you have that unique circumstance, to just go ahead and use SUMIF. Now, that's a great reason to know how to join your comparative operators with a number from a cell. All right, let's look at our next example. Actually, we already looked at this example, but we'll talk a little bit about this, what wildcards are. We saw this question mark asterisk. Question mark is a wildcard that means 0 or more characters. Question mark means one character. When you combine them, it means any cell with one or more characters. All right, let's see our formula. F2 Control V. My first criteria range is going to be region, REG, comma, this. The next criteria range is customer, CUS tab, comma. And then finally, sales are S down arrow tab, comma, and then that right there. All right, so you have 3 criteria ranges, 3 separate criteria, Control Enter. Now, we already did this one, but once the beauty of this is if you're doing analysis with these 3 criteria cells, you can easily select this show me, add everything for these 2 criteria, and just show me southeast. So that question mark asterisk. But it did was incumbent that we type that into our at the top of our data validation list. All right, now let's do a couple more. Oh, wildcards. We want to talk about contains criteria. So sometimes you want to find all the norths because you have, in our case, we have a north and a northeast. So if you put an asterisk before and after, it means find anything in that column, the region column, that contains north. So here we'll do Control V. The criteria range is going to be region, comma, the contains criteria. And then S down arrow tab. That's our criteria range 2, and then our criteria 2. Tina. So I want to see all of Tina's sales in north or northeast. And there we have it. If I were to change this to, oh, I didn't do data validation, but I could remember something here. How about GG? There's all GG sales in the north or northeast. Control Z. All right, what about this question mark? Now, I don't run into this often, but if you ever had to do something like any customer with exactly 2 characters, we can see in this customer column the sum of the customers are 2 characters. We could add all those for Tina by using 2 question marks. And our first criteria range will be region. And comma, I'm going to select this cell here with 2 question marks. You could also type those in if it really was always going to be that. We saw how earlier you can hard code criteria in with as long as it's in double quotes. All right, and our second criteria range is sales rep. So this means add up all those ODs and HMs and HDs, all of the regions. Oh, sorry, this is not region. This should be customer. So I better change that. Criteria 1, I'm going to have to change that there too. So I'm going to highlight this. Or you can double click. Actually, here's a great trick. You can, if my cursor's right here, if you come over in the screen tip and click on criteria range 1, it'll highlight it. And now I'm just going to type CUM, CUS for customer, and then tab. All right, so that should do it. And I better change this quickly too. All right, if I were to change this to Costco, I would instantly update, but the 2 question marks means any customer exactly with 2 characters. Now, we already just talked about this hard coding criteria directly into a formula, but here I've explicitly written some stuff. So if I was to look for region and comma in the north. Now, occasionally, if it's never going to change, that's OK. But our golden rule in all of Excel is if things can change, you put stuff in the cell, refer to it with cell references. All right, so occasionally, if this north never changes, go ahead and type it in. If it's ever going to have the chance of change, type north into a cell, refer to it with a cell reference. That is efficient Excel use. How about SUMIFs copying down a column? Well, we already saw this, but let's look at relative and absolute. So we need to figure out all of the each individual region for the Google customer. So we do our SUMIFs, and our criteria range 1 is going to be customer. So CUS, comma, the criteria 1, I'm going to click on Google and hit the F4 key to lock it. That locks it in both directions, both the across the columns if we were to copy it and the rows. Comma, the criteria range 2 is going to be region. And then this is a relative cell reference. So as I copy down the dancing ant, the cell reference will move. Those are like little dancing ants. They don't actually keep dancing as you copy it down, though. They stop dancing. All right, so that's an example of copying it down. Now, we talked about this earlier in the video. These defined names are absolute by default. So when you copy them, those ranges over here are not moving. But here's an explicit situation where we had to lock the criteria. Notice it's still locked there using those $signs. And then this was a relative cell reference. All right, our next example, 18. This is a hard one. This is mixed cell references. And if you're a beginner, mixed cell references get tough. I don't have a reference video, but if you go to the excelisfun channel and search for mixed cell references or cell references, I have some epic videos on all the different types of cell references. But here we go. I need to, in every single cell, add with 3 criteria. In this cell, I need the region Northeast and the sales rep Gigi for customer Google, right? So how can I do that? I want one formula that I can copy down and over. No problem. I can use F2 Control V. Well, I have the range I want to add. The criteria range 1, that's going to be sales reps. So I'm going to do S down arrow tab, comma, criteria 1. I click on Bat's name. Now, as I copy it down, I need the dancing ants, that little relative cell reference to move as I copy the formula down. So I do not want a $ locking the 110. I want that 110 to move to 11 and then 12. But when I copy this to the side, across the columns, I don't want the I to move. So I have to put a $ in front of the I. Now, if your cursor's touching a cell reference, the F4 key is a merry-go-round key. If I keep hitting the F4 key, it toggles. That's absolute. That's just the row reference lock. That's just the column reference. That's relative. So it merry-go-rounds through all the different cell references. So I'm going to stop where the column is locked but not the row. Comma, the next criteria range is going to be region. So I'm going to type REG tab, comma. Now our criteria 2, well, I'm going to click on this cell reference. This is the opposite. When I copy down, I need it locked on 109. But when I copy to the side, I want that green box to move from J to K. So that J doesn't need to be locked, but the number does. So I hit the F4 key once and twice. Row reference locked for this one. Column reference locked for that one. Comma, the third criteria range is going to be customer, CUS tab, comma, and the criteria 3, boom, Google, F4, both the column and the row. Close parentheses, Control Enter. Now, this is a two-step process. Double-click that little fill handle with your crosshair or angry rabbit. And then once it's copied down, then grab the fill handle again with that crosshair or angry rabbit and drag it over. Now I'm going to come to the very last corner cell and hit the F2 key. Now actually, I want to scroll over here. I want to look at this. Did it get it right? Is that one in the right place? Yes. Is that one in the right place? Yes. Is that one? Yes. And all these other ones are absolute, so it worked perfect. Now you can see that Bill didn't have any in the Midwest. Or the Southeast, right? Chin didn't have any in the Southeast. But the rest of them are looking perfect. So that is a great example, not just of the SUMIFs, but of using all the different types of cell references, right? Mixed, this is called a mixed. Absolute, well, actually, we didn't use a relative, but we used 3 of the 4 main cell references. All right. Now let's scroll down. All right, we want to scroll down here and talk about example 19. We want to talk about between criteria. Now here we want to add sales between a lower and an upper. So here we want to add up all the sales between 0 and 2,500, all the sales we have between 2,500 and 5,000. Now the trick is, notice there's a 2,500 here and here. When you're setting up the categories, make sure there's an equal sign on one side but not the other, right? Because if we had equal sign here for 2,500 and down here, we might run the risk of double counting and adding sales here that were exactly 2,500 and here. Now these are just the description. When we do our formula, we'll have a lower and an upper, and we'll build our formula based on those lower and upper. So I'm going to do equals SUMIFS, and we're actually going to have to list our sales 3 times. So for criteria range, I'm going to list sales again. And now here's our first criteria. We're going to include the equal sign on the lower end. So greater than or equal to, that's in double quote. That's the comparative operator. And I'm going to join it to the lower. And I'm going to type a comma to get to criteria range. Well, let's see. Criteria range 2. And this is sales also. Criteria 2 is going to be double quotes less than in double quotes and join it to the upper. So anything we count is going to be less than this upper. Close parentheses, and that formula will add between an upper and a lower without double counting. All right, now we want to come down here and see how to, in essence, do the same thing, but we have dates, which are serial numbers, and we're going to have to count between an upper and a lower. But here's a different situation. We have the end of the month, and the end of the month is not listed here. This is the beginning of next month. So we have an equal sign. We're doing between the two dates inclusive. We want to include both the upper and the lower. So SUMIFS. And we're still doing the sales, but the criteria range 1 and 2 will be date. I got to be careful. There's a defined name and a built-in function here, right? So I'm going to take that and less than double quotes, greater than or equal to end double quotes, and join it to the lower date. And then the upper, I'm going to say less than or equal to. All right, so a little bit different situation. The equals on both sides. Why? Because these are not the same, right? We have all the dates here. It's just there's not a duplicate like there was up here. Control Enter, and double click and send it down. So if I go to the last one, you can see, boom, it worked perfectly. All right, let's scroll down. About some of the more odd things you might do with SUMIF. Now I'm going to talk about what empty means, what a null text string is, what not empty, and those kind of things. It's not that you would particularly have to do this very often, but understanding that empty and a null text string are different is important. Now, I'm going to scroll over here. I'm going to use a different data set. I've color-coded this. There's a formula in there. Now, you usually don't see formulas like this. You usually see bigger formulas that if it doesn't evaluate correctly or doesn't deliver the right record, it shows a blank. And that double quote is a null text string. It has length 0. If I were to measure that with the length function that counts how many characters, it gives you 0, right? So that's that weird text string, null text string. This is an empty cell, however, right? They are sometimes treated the same and sometimes treated differently. So let's first see the criteria for empty. Null string is not included. So equals SUMIFS. And I'm going to, whoops, I keep forgetting F2 Control V. Now I've lost it. OK, so maybe it's just faster to type that out every time. I'm such a bad typer, though. OK, so criteria range. Here's our criteria. We got our, actually, what am I doing? I'm asleep at the wheel, but that's OK. At least I'm catching myself. I don't want sales. I want this new range right here. So boom and boom. We're going to try and sum, and there's our criteria. Comma. Now, what is our criteria? If we want an actual empty, just an equal sign in double quotes. That means empty. It will not include that null text string. And we should get exactly 3. Now, if you want both an empty cell and a null text string, now I'll just copy this. Control V, just put in a null text string. This null text string in this context will count both the empty cell and the null text string. It will add up 5 and 3. Now, what if you wanted not empty? Now, what this means is that cell right there is not empty because it has a null text string. So in this case, we can use Control V, the not. I know this all seems like Greek, and it is. You just have to remember that. And there are a few other ways we could do this, but that's a pretty good one for empty. That's a good one for either or. And this one's for not empty. So these two are related, right? The equal sign is empty. This is not empty. That means it's going to get everything except for the empty cell. That's what it says here, text number or null text string. And finally, what if you really wanted to get not empty or not null text string? That means we want those numbers, which is 9. Well, we have this one here, which is adding both of these. So I'm going to take that, copy, equals sum, and add them all. And then subtract. You can see it's black. Anytime it's black, you know there's a problem with your formula. The rainbow color coding is not coming into effect. So now I've added all and then subtracted the ones that are either empty or a null text string. And these kind of things are just occasionally you run into them, but understanding that null text strings and empty cells are different, and sometimes they cause problems. All right, now let's talk about what you do. We talked about wildcards, but what if you actually want to look up a wildcard? So here, these Joes are different than that Joe. No problem. If you read in help for SUMIFS or COUNTIFS or even the match function, they tell you there's a little tilde. It's to the left of the number 1. And we can use that here. So I'm going to SUMIFS, and here's the sum range of these calls, comma, criteria range 1. I'm going to do Joe, the column with the names, comma, and here is the criteria. Let's just try it and see what happens. Right now, I already know what's going to happen. It's going to find all the Joes. Comma, the criteria range 2 is the west, and then the criteria is the west. So now, and we get 90, right? And that should be in the west. There's a 1 there. Oh, here, if I go like this, I can look down at the status bar. There's a, OK, so these ones, dung, dung, dung. And so if I look down here, I should be getting 90. And sure enough, down in the status bar, I'm getting 90. So that's not what I want. No problem. We simply have to take our criteria. We're looking there at asterisk Joe. And if I want it, I'm going to have to join the tilde in double quotes to that criteria. That means now it will find just asterisk Joe. And so asterisk Joe in the west should be there. And it got R70. So that's the little tilde trick. Still another situation you might run into. SUMIFS is not case sensitive. So if I said SUMIFS and I did my sum range, all of these calls, comma, criteria range 1, I'll do west. And then criteria range 2, I'll do Joe. And unfortunately, it's going to find all the Joes in the west, right? So that's the total right there, 140. You can see down there. So it's just not. And that's true in Access, too, and Excel, and a lot of Excel and Access. But no problem. There's a solution. And it's going to get pretty wild here. We're going to have to use a completely different setup. We're going to use the exact function. Now, the exact function is made to check whether two things are equal case sensitive. So normally, you would say something like, is that cell, comma, equal to this cell? Now, I've selected a lowercase j and an uppercase, so this will be false. But that's not what I want. I need to analyze the whole column. So here, instead of just one, I'm going to highlight all of them. Now, as soon as you do that, you've jumped into the realm of array formulas. That text argument is expecting a single cell or a single text item, right? So when I hit Enter, it says value error. It says, hey, this is not the way I'm programmed to calculate. But watch this. In edit mode, if you highlight it and hit the F9 key, whoa, you could see it's given me an exact array, 1, 2, 3, 4, exactly in the correct locations. It's finding them. So it calculates in edit mode correctly. No problem. We're going to use this string of trues and falses, and we're going to use the sum product function. Now, here's the way it works. Sum product cannot read these trues and falses. So we need to convert them to ones and zeros, because the sum product in this array argument will understand ones and zeros. The most efficient way to convert trues and falses to ones and zeros is to use double negative. You can actually use any math operation, multiply by 1, divide by 1, raise to the 1. But double negative is the most efficient method. If you were to time it, it tends to be faster. Now, check this out. Right now, if I hit Enter on this, what is it doing? It will just, actually, let's F9. You could see, oh, it gives me the ones and zeros. So that double negative converts it. Now, what does sum product do? Well, with just one array, it'll add those. It'll tell you how many capital Joes there are for. But I'm interested in not only in the capital Joe, but the west, and then adding the number. So that's where these other arrays come in. right? So array 2, and we're going to use our same double negative. I'm going to say, is anything in that column equal to West? Right? And that'll give me the same situation. It'll give me a bunch of 1s and 0s. Only when there's a 1 here and a 1 here will we get a true. Remember, and criteria requires that they're all the criteria have been met. Now, Control Z, let me enter this. And that means there's 2. It's counting in the West. Well, how does it do that? In an array formula like this, if I were to F9 and to F9 here, you can see it's only when it gets a 1 times a 1 is it going to get a true. Right? 1 times 0 is 0. And 0 times, if there was a 1, it would be 0. Now I'm going to escape because I don't want to hard code that in. I don't want 2. I want to add them. So that's where the third array can come in, this third array. Now, only when it's a 1 times whatever associated number here will it get the numbers 20 and 50 and then add them. So that wacky formula right there is a case-sensitive way to do adding with criteria. Actually, one more thing about this formula here. Notice when we did this range and this criteria, this is a direct array operation. And we put the comparative operator not in double quotes, but directly touching the range of values or array against the criteria. That is something that you do with array formulas. But in SUMIFS, you have to put that comparative operator in double quotes. So that's just a difference. All right, now let's go look at some other examples. Example 28. Can the SUMIF look to a different sheet? So we have our criteria here, and we want a total. But look at this over on the sheet week 1. There is our data set. No problem. We can do that. I'm going to do equals SUMIFS. The sum range, well, the range is on a different sheet, so I'm going to click on that sheet. And then I'm going to highlight the sum range. Now you can see up here it has the sheet name in single apostrophes and an exclamation point. That is, those are the syntax elements for a sheet reference. And then it says C2 to C7. I can see my screen tip right there, comma, criteria range 2. I think I have names, comma, and then criteria. I'm going to skip over that for a second because it's back on the other sheet. I'm going to comma. Notice I've skipped over it. I'm going to get my second criteria range, which is region. All right, and then comma, and I'm going to close parentheses. Now I can click, and luckily the screen tip will help me. Criteria 1, well, that's back on the sheet. So I'll go back over to 978 and click on it. And I click on the names. Now notice, if I come back down here, oh, sheet references, now they're starting to pop up everywhere. So I'm going to actually delete it. All right, and then for this last one, I'm just going to type it in. It's in J214, so J214. Right, because if I start clicking, once I start doing one sheet reference, they all turn to sheet references. All right, and so there is our answer of 40. If I change this to East, I can see that it's working just fine. Control Z. Now, we want to talk about SUMIFS and 3D cell references, but before we do that, let me show you what a 3D cell reference is. Now, I want a total from 3 different sheets. Week 1, I want to add these numbers. And then on week 2, these numbers. And week 3, these numbers. Now, notice they're always in C2 to C7. So there's templates on each page that have the same size. If that's the case and you want to add or do some calculation, 3D cell references are amazing. Now think about this. C2 to C7 exists on each sheet. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to say equals sum. And to get my 3D cell reference, I'm going to start by clicking on week 1. I'm going to highlight the range. Up in the formula bar, I can see week 1, C2 to C7. But now check this out down here. Before I click, I'm not going to click on 2. I'm going to click on the last one. And before I click, I'm going to hold the Shift key. I'm holding Shift, and I click on week 3. Now look, week 1, colon, week 3, C2 to C7. Control Enter, and there I have a 3D cell reference. It means I'm getting all the C2s to C7 for the sheets week 1 all the way to week 3. Now, if we could use 3D cell references in SUMIF, that would be great. Let's go ahead and try it. Now I've already created this here. You can see we put for the sum range week 1 to week 3, C2 to C7, and then for criteria range 1, week 1 to 3, B, the B range. The problem is 3D cell references do not work in the SUMIFs. You're just going to get a value error. So that is a known problem, and so here are 2 workarounds. One of them will involve a single cell formula here on this sheet that just looks to those other sheets. And I'll do number 31 first. This will involve a regular 3D cell reference with the sum function. But over here, we'll do individual calculations on each sheet. So we're going to do our calculations locally near the data, but then summarize them over here. Sometimes you can do this. Sometimes you can't. Let's go ahead and see. I'm just going to use the SUMIFs here. And we're adding the numbers. And our criteria range is going to be the West. It's only the criteria that doesn't exist on this sheet. So I'm going to click back on 978. And here it is, our West. And then Control Enter. So now I have an individual calculation here with the sheet reference for the criteria. And I've created the same formula on each sheet. So now I can simply do a 3D cell reference equals sum. Week 1, highlight the E2, and you can see this up here. Shift, click on week 3, and there's our formula. I'm going to Control Enter. And so there's our formula. It will work. In essence, it's making a global 3D reference from here. Global just means it's looking to the other sheets with local calculations on those other sheets. Now, if that's possible, that is a great solution. If it's not, we have to get a little bit more complicated here. Now, the trick is we're going to have to use the indirect function. Indirect. Now, indirect exists to take text that represents a reference and convert it from text back into a reference. So what we're going to do is that we have to type the sheet names here. And if I highlight these sheet names, that won't work because we need the single apostrophe and exclamation point syntax. So I'm going to join to the front of this. Double quote, single quote, double quote, and then ampersand to join. All I've done is I needed a single apostrophe, but you got to put it in double quotes, right? And then I come to the end. I have to do double quote, single apostrophe, and then exclamation point. Now I'm going to do the range C2 to C7. Now notice when I put this in double quotes, that's clearly an example of colon. That's clearly a example of a reference that's text, right? And so indirect converts text that represents a reference back into a reference. Now let's go ahead and highlight this right here and hit the F9 key. You could see it's giving us all 3 sheet names and the C2 to C7 range. Absolutely cool. But that's text, right? Control Z. Indirect converts it from text back into a reference. Now when we highlight this, it's going to give us nonsense. We can't F9 it and look at what it is, Control Z, but our formula will interpret it correctly. Now, I'm going to put this inside the SUMIFs. Now, that's the sum range. Oops, Control Z. Ooh, that was scary. Copy, Control C. That's our sum range. Criteria range, Control V. And it is West, so I think that if I remember correctly, that's the B column. Notice how we're this is all hard-coded in here too. All right, so criteria range, and if I were to highlight this well, okay, so we got the 2 ranges. These indirects are tricking the SUMIFs. They will create ranges that the SUMIFs can interpret that are 3D. All right, ready? Comma, and then the criteria is this right here. And sure enough, it's not going to work. But let's look at the result in edit mode. SUMIFs. What's happening here is if we highlight this and evaluate it, F9, it's giving us 3 numbers. Why? Because it's from 3 sheets. Those are the total. 60, 110, 120. Now I'm going to Control Z and just hit Enter and go look. 60, 110, 120. So this funny little construction here with the indirect to trick the SUMIFs into looking at a 3D cell reference, highlighting it when SUMIFs evaluates, it's delivering 3 numbers. Well, OK, so we can't display 3 numbers in a cell. Now we simply put it inside the sum product. Sum product. And sum product will properly add the SUMIFs. Because the SUMIFs is delivering an array of values, that argument right there is an array that will add them. Now we're only giving it a single array, but it will handle that array and add. Absolutely amazing. And that's without any helper formulas on those other cells. Now the one problem potentially here is indirect is a volatile function, which means anytime you do something like insert a row or enter data and hit enter, it recalculates. For a small spreadsheet with not a lot of large formulas, it doesn't matter. It's not going to affect calculation time or recalculation time. But if you have a lot of formulas, big, huge spreadsheet, and calculation time is slow, indirect would contribute to more slowness. And therefore, maybe that wouldn't be the best option in this option here. But there's 2 ways to deal with 3D cell references when you have a criteria across sheets. Now, I have hidden some rows. If you look between 32 and 47, so I'm going to highlight 32 to 47 and right-click Unhide. There's whoops, I clicked hide. Right-click Unhide. Zoop. And there's some notes if you want to read. All right, on to our next example. If we have SUMIFs and we need to look to an external workbook, that causes some problems. But let's go ahead and see what happens here. I'm going to SUMIFs. Actually, escape. I'm going to Control Tab. I have this other workbook named External Data on the sheet table. And there's our data. It's in another workbook. So I just want to do SUMIFs. The sum range, I'm going to Control Tab to jump to the other workbook. There's our range for sum, comma, the criteria range. I'm going to take those names, comma, I'm going to skip the criteria 1, comma, and get to criteria 2 and highlight. And then type a comma, close parentheses. Oh, you could see this. I'm going to Control Enter and just look at it over here. What a workbook reference does is it automatically comes in absolute, and it puts the workbook name in square brackets. There's the sheet name. You could change these if you want, but the type of cell reference, but we don't need to do that here. Let's go ahead and put our criteria in. I love these screen tips. I don't know what I do without them. So criteria 1, that is name. And then criteria 2, that's going to be our region. I think I got that right, right? So the B was the region, right? Yeah. All right, so that works fine and dandy. But what happens if you close the workbook? So I'm going to close this. All right, and if you, well, first off, you get the complete file path. But if you close this workbook and open it, it can't see that. The SUMIFs sum range argument can't handle this external reference. So if you need to look at the result when the workbook is closed, then you need to do something different. One way to deal with this is to use the sum product. All right, now I've reopened that. I closed that workbook just a moment ago, but I opened the external data workbook. And now I'm going to build my formula using sum product. Now we have 1 column, 2 column, plus some numbers, right? So we're going to have 3 arrays. I'm going to double negative, open parentheses. Now I'm going to Control Tab, jump over there, and the first column is names. I'm going to type in equal sign and then Control Tab. Now check this out. When we say, is that equal to Joe, it doesn't put in all that extra junk because we're doing a workbook reference. We saw earlier how the sheet reference puts extra stuff in besides just the cell reference, but not here for this workbook reference. All right, that's array 1, comma, double negative, open parentheses. I'm going to Control Tab, get that range equal, Control Tab, and say anything in there equal to West. I'm in array 2. Now I have to close that parentheses up. By the way, the reason we have to use these parentheses is because the equal sign calculates after the math operator double negative. And so to force the equal sign to calculate first, we always have to put it in double quotes. Comma, and then finally the third array, Control Tab. I simply get my numbers, close parentheses, and Control Enter. All right, so there we have it. Notice when we open it back up, not only does the file path go away, but the SUMIFs work. So SUMIFs are great if you just only need them to calculate when the external workbook is open. But now let's close this. I'm going to close this and Control S. So that one, I'm in essence recalculating, but the sum product will work even when the workbook, external workbook is closed. All right, let's look at, we have 3 more examples. Occasionally you get a situation like this. Here's our data set down here. But you're given criteria, a year criteria. But serial numbers, as we know, are serial numbers. That's number formatting there. You can't match a year against a serial number date. No problem. Here's a trick. We're going to use SUMIFs. And there are some product formulas that will accomplish this. But pretty much anytime you can use the SUMIFs instead of a sum product, it's much faster calculating, more efficient. All right, so the sum range. Well, we have some West, so I'm just going to get this region right here, comma, and then the sum range, comma. Luckily, we have those screen tips. Criteria range, comma, criteria, comma, criteria range. Now, I'm going to have to list it twice because I'm going to, in essence, create the beginning of the year 1/1/2012, and then also the end of the year. So just like we did earlier with between date criteria, that's what we're going to do here. So criteria range, I actually have to list the dates twice, comma, and here we go. Criteria 2. It is going to be greater than or equal to 1/1/ all in double quotes, and then join it with the ampersand to 2012. Now here's the deal. If it was month, which we'll do in our next example, months have different numbers of days in each month. So you have to get tricky with that. But here, the first of the year is always 1/1. So we can actually hard code that in if we want the whole year. All right, so that's criteria 2. And then date. And then criteria 3, we're going to do double quotes less than or equal to 12/31 / end double quote, and then ampersand to join it with the year. Again, we can get away with this here because December is, for us, in our situation, we always have the actual calendar year, not some fiscal year. So we can get away with hard coding that in. But that is the formula that will calculate based on a criteria mismatch. We can't match this directly against those, but we can create that formula. Now the alternative is to use sum product, and for some it may be easier to create. But the trick is you use the year function to look at these dates. That creates an array of years, and you can match it directly against this criteria. However, if you have the choice, and the SUMIFs are just more efficient functions. All right, let's go down and see our next example. This is also example 35, which is a criteria mismatch. Here we're given month as text and a year. No problem. We're going to create a similar formula, but the only trick will be the end date, because December has 31 days, but November has 30, right? So we can't hard code that 30 or 31. And if we had February dates, sometimes it can be 28, sometimes it can be 29. So let's see how to do this using the SUMIFs. So the sum range, we're going to add visits, comma. Criteria range 1 and 2 will be dates, and we'll have a lower date and an upper date. All right, so comma. The first criteria is going to be in double quotes, greater than or equal to, and then 1 in double quote, ampersand, December, ampersand, 2012. Now this right here, if we were to highlight this and hit the F9 key, Excel will interpret the number 1 and then 3 letters for the month and then the year correctly as a date. Control Z. So that one will work. Comma. Now we highlight the date column again. And now we're going to have to get tricky because we're going to need the end of the month. Luckily, there's an end of the month function. So end of the month function. Now the start date, we're going to have to do something similar to this. And end of month will miraculously understand it. In double quotes, 1 in double quotes, and then join it to December and join it to year. Now inside the end of the month, it's expecting a start date. So if I hit F9, you can see it's text, but end of month will interpret it correctly. I'm going to Control Z. Now, we just gave it the first of the month. How is that going to work? Well, comma and the second argument of end of month. If I give it a 0, it gives me the end of this month. If I were to give it a 1, it would give me the end of next month. If I gave it a -1, it would give me the end of last month. So we want 0. Now let's just see if this works. This is so amazing. It gives us a serial number, but it happens to be the correct number, serial number for December 31st, 2012. Control Z. Now that's an exact date. We need to add our comparative operator here too. So in double quotes, less than or equal to, and double quotes and join. And now, if I highlight this and hit the F9, sure enough, that will work. Now notice that gives me a different result than this criteria right here, but it will work in our sum product. Control Z. There we go. That is a wacky formula. And it gives us 13 for December 2012. If I were to change it to November, it would give me, let's see, there's a 12. Just that's the only one. So Control Z. That is a wacky formula. Now there, of course, is a sum product way we could do this. I'm going to copy this from down here, and I think I have the. There we go. It's using the text function. Now the reason we use text is because text takes numbers and formats them with custom number formatting and converts them to text, which then we can match against these. But again, that is inefficient in the long run, and it's actually the text function takes a long time to calculate. So this one, even though it's got end of month and a bunch of junk and it's complicated to create, it's a lot more efficient than the sum product equivalent. All right, our last example. This is actually just a silly point about the SUMIF function that does something totally different than SUMIFS or COUNTIF or any of those. Let's look at this. If I do SUMIF, the range is a criteria range, so I'm going to highlight the names, comma, and then the criteria is Phyllis. And sum range, if you don't highlight the same number of cells for the sum range, it doesn't matter. Because with the SUMIF, the range argument, the dimensions of that determines what the dimensions of the sum range. Now, if you leave it like this and it's not the same, then it is a volatile function, and it takes sometimes longer to calculate. Now, for a small spreadsheet with not very many formulas, it wouldn't matter at all. But that is an unusual aspect of the SUMIF function. All right. That, Control Home, that was a lot about SUMIFs and a little bit about SUMIF. But SUMIFs can be used for all the SUMIF tasks also. And pretty much everything we saw can be applied, the criteria stuff can be applied to COUNTIFs, COUNTIF, AVERAGEIFs, and so on. All right, we'll see you next video.